got a chance! Grand slam! The Yankees win! And a touchdown!
He goes to the net! He scores! He scores!
Home run! Number 3 of the night!
Big City Sports Podcast. With me today is Swig. Jonah Norris has a personal matter to attend to today, so it will be just me, Dylan Kearns, with Swig today. Swig, how you doing?
I'm good, Dylan. How's everything going with you?
Pretty good. We have a lot to touch on today, mostly baseball, hockey. We'll get to basketball, the Brooklyn Nets, and Jim Boylan, who we teased a little bit in the last episode towards the end. We will touch on them later on, but we have a lot of baseball to get to, along with hockey, like I said. So the Yankees are coming off an abysmal series against the Tampa Bay Rays, and they also lose Giancarlo Stanton. Swig, what do you think about the Yankees' efforts this weekend?
Well, abysmal is a pretty good way to sum it up, Dylan. That's a great description. We all knew the 8-1 start wasn't going to be sustained the whole season. That's true for every team. Even in a 60-game year, every team's going to fall back to earth a little bit. But the Yankees, decision-making, lack of aggressiveness in terms of their pitching staff and their lack of timely hitting definitely was a big downfall against a team like the Rays, who's so good at meticulously planning for every single series. We all know how in-depth Kevin Cash thinks out every single at-bat with that deep pitching staff, and the Yankees did a pretty bad job adjusting. And I honestly would have been okay with it if we managed to salvage Sunday's game and get a split of a 4-game series, but the Yankees unfortunately choked that one away, and they've lost 5 out of 7 after a good start. So it's a good thing we got today off. Recording this on Monday before we play a couple games against the Braves, but hopefully the Yankees can use it to reset a little bit because that was a rough series.
Yeah, it was indeed. And one thing I wanted to touch was the Yankees, Giancarlo Stanton being hurt again. They decided to bring up Thairo Estrada instead of Clint Frazier and Miguel Andujar, which obviously Frazier, I thought he'd be up right away with the injury, a swap for the left fielder, and honestly, he could DH because you know how he is out there in the outfield. And one more thing, I was shocked in Sunday's game, I think it was. That was the one that Paxton started. I was shocked to see him go back out there in the 7th inning. I thought that with the bullpen like the Yankees, that's the time where you got to lead. You got to go in there and shut it down.
I agree 100% on the bullpen point. I do want to make a quick point there. We did originally call up Estrada, but earlier today the Yankees did announce we're bringing up Frazier instead, and I do think that's the right move. So he will be with the team for tomorrow's game against Atlanta. Andujar's defense and left was even worse than Clint Frazier's, but I do expect the Yankees to get very creative with that DH spot. I think the Yankees are going to rotate a few players through it, get a little half day off. We've done that in the past when Stanton's been out of the lineup. I expect Judge to get a couple days there, Gleyber Torres, maybe even Gary Sanchez to get his legs fresh after a couple days catching. And I think that could be good for him as well because he's really struggled. But Clint Frazier will be up with the team. In terms of Sunday's game, it looked so promising for the first 6 innings. Paxton had 2 rough starts to begin the year, and he had 6 shutout innings going, 1 hit, 1 walk, I believe 10 strikeouts. And I get that he was only at 77 pitches, and usually I do think I like to send them out for another inning at that point. But with the Yankees bullpen pretty well rested, even after a doubleheader the day before, and with a 3-run lead, I just didn't think it was a big enough margin for error to risk it. We had Paxton's confidence back up where we wanted it, and we had a 3-0 lead in a game I think we really needed to win. And we just took it a little bit too far with Paxton, unfortunately. And when you get through the lineup for the 3rd time, things like that are bound to happen in a lot of games.
And Aaron Judge, the first Yankee in 13 years to homer in 5 straight games. And he's got his major league leading 8th of the year. Tatis is on his tail, but that's the National League. So Judge continues to rake. The offense is always going to rake. And hopefully they can get over their pitching struggles at least to this point.
I hope so, but yeah, you mentioned the home runs. Judge has obviously been great to start the year, and Stanton was off to a solid start before the injury. He hit his third homer in the first game, I believe, of the doubleheader on Saturday. But I do worry that the Yankees are a little over-reliant on the home run sometimes. It wins us a solid amount of games, but if the Yankees' bats are silenced in terms of hitting home runs, we generally do not do a good enough job manufacturing runs in closer, low-scoring games. And that came back to bite us in that game on Sunday where we blew the 3-0 lead. And also in the opener of the series on Friday where we lost 1-0 and couldn't get anything going whatsoever. And the Rays managed to manufacture a run in the eighth, and the Yankees just couldn't do it.
Yeah, and transitioning over to the Cubs. So when this video was released, the Cubs were rolling on Thursday. If you watched it in the afternoon, then you were feeling really good about the Cubs. Well, that night they got their teeth kicked in. Tyler Chatwood showed his real colors, true colors out there on the mound. He struggled against the Royals, who ended up sweeping Minnesota over the weekend. That was huge for the Royals. But just to have the Cubs get their teeth kicked in, and then they have to wait a couple of games for the Cardinals with COVID, and then they have the day off today we're recording on Monday. Big series against the Twins coming up. They're struggling, but the Cubs, they had some momentum. I really wish that they could have won at least one more game after that before they had their little break, if you will. But they did change the rotation a little bit to start their little refresh. It'll be John Lester going. It was supposed to be against Mike Clevenger tomorrow, but Clevenger broke protocol along with Zach Plesac of the Indians. So that starting spot for the Indians on Tuesday is still up in the air. But it'll be Lester, and then we'll go from there.
Understood. No, I know the Cubs. There's never going to be an ideal timing for a rolling team to have to pause for a few days. I do honestly think, in a way, it's better that it happened after a loss instead of while they were still on a winning streak, because that's always a bit of a downer to have to stop a winning streak in the middle. But overall, Cubs are still off to a very promising start. I believe 10-3 at the time of this recording, and the pause obviously has a lot more to do with the Cardinals than it does with the Cubs. So overall, I actually do think it was better for them to get that one loss out of the way. You knew it was going to be coming eventually, and that Chatwood, while I do still think has the potential to have a better season, I think his real potential is somewhere in between what we saw in his first two starts and what happened in Kansas City where he got lit up. I do think it was good to just give him a little bit of a reality check, but nothing like the sky is falling or anything like that. I think David Ross is a good manager to have in terms of he can relate to these players. It's kind of like an extended rain delay. You're enjoying the middle of a game, enjoying the middle of a winning streak, and you have to stop for a few days. I think he'll be a good guy to sail them through this, and they'll be prepared to play when they come back.
Yeah, former catcher David Ross too, so he might be able to help with the psyche of the pitching staff after getting rocked in a big start like that. But I agree with you on Chatwood. I think he's better, but he's not as good as he was in his first two starts, like you said. Kyle Hendricks, he got roughed around in his start against the Reds, so we'll see how he comes back after this little restart thing. The Cubs lineup has been looking pretty good. Ian Happ looks to be a great, I don't know about great center fielder, a great hitter in that lineup, because his defense and center suspect. He was a second baseman at Cincinnati, and he hasn't really showed the potential. He has terrible reads sometimes in the outfield. He'll make a diving catch from time to time, but whenever there's a ball in the air, he just easily looks lost out there. But the Cubs are looking pretty good. Hopefully they can take care of business against Minnesota. The White Sox got their little show on Sunday Night Baseball. They did end up losing 5-4 in extra innings with a rain delay there. But the Cubs were supposed to be playing the Cardinals on there, but they decided to keep it with another Chicago team who has some young talent with Luis Robert. The pitching staff's looking okay. What do you think about the White Sox so far?
The White Sox are off to an average start, which is honestly what I expected. I believe they're 8-8 at the time of this recording, and been struggling a little bit more after a solid start. And if I'm not mistaken, they're actually fourth in the division right now because the Tigers are off to a surprisingly good start, and the Twins are doing solid like we all expected, and Cleveland's doing a solid job. Although, like you mentioned with Clevenger and Plesac, we'll see what happens with their starting rotation. But overall, I still think the White Sox have a bright future. I still think they're going to finish either second or third in that division. I don't think Detroit's success is sustainable, but with Luis Robert, he got off to a solid start. He's 3 for 19 in his last 5 games. I believe he's getting the next game off. I think that's a solid move for them. But Aaron Bummer going on the injured list. I know we've talked about him as a key piece in that bullpen. And while there are a couple of promising signs from some of the guys the White Sox have brought up, he's a big loss and their biggest left-handed weapon out of that bullpen. And it is going to have a lasting effect as long as he's out of the pitching rotation.
Yeah, the White Sox are an interesting team. They have the young talent with Robert Moncada. I like him a lot, the switch hitter. And Nick Madrigal got his shot, and he actually got injured. So I don't know the extent of that injury. I haven't read up on it recently, but Nick Madrigal got called up, the young prospect hitter out of Oregon State, I believe. Great contact hitter, great defense, good speed. He's not going to hit the long ball. He's sort of like a Nico Horner on the Cubs side of town. But I like his potential. The White Sox are very raw, and Bummer is a huge loss for them, and especially in a shortened season like this.
I agree. Yeah, the future is definitely bright. I still said at the beginning that they're at least one more year away. They have a very intriguing roster of veterans and extremely young but raw talent. And Bummer's loss as one of the more experienced and proven players on that team is going to have a big impact while they're out, because the White Sox pitching staff, like you mentioned, has been average at best. And losing one of their more consistent, reliable pieces is not going to be an easy adjustment for them.
Yep. And kicking gears over to the New York Mets. The Mets are not looking good. We touched on Cespedes opting out on the last episode. And the Mets, they are not looking good. What are your takeaways of the Mets so far these past couple of weeks?
Well, the Mets, as usual, are a very entertaining but poorly run circus, and nothing has really changed there. Now, well, with Cespedes, I don't think any rational person is going to blame the organization for what happened there. All Cespedes had to do is inform a member of the organization that he was opting out. So that one's not on the Mets, but they are down 16-3 to the Nationals as we're recording this on Monday night here. They've been struggling a bit. Their bullpen has continued to be an issue. And Edwin Diaz, again, has been a major disappointment since he came over. And if I'm not mistaken, Jed Lowry's been placed on the 45-day injured list, and his Mets career is essentially over. And we also have to talk about Marcus Stroman. He opted out of the season today as well, far more professionally than Cespedes did. But with him opting out and Michael Wacha being on the injured list, that whole pitching staff has really struggled outside of DeGrom. What do you think?
Yeah, interesting note on Marcus Stroman. Now, usually when there's service time involved, it's the big league club making the decisions, right? It's usually like for Chris Bryant, they called him up the day or a couple days after he had that extra year of eligibility.
Extra year of team control.
Yeah, exactly. This was interesting. Today was the very last day of Marcus Stroman's eligibility for to be eligible for free agency next year. And he waited until this day, and then he opted out. So he's going to be a free agent next year. He will never throw a ball with the Mets again unless they re-up his deal. So this is not good news for the Mets pitching staff that, like you said, Michael Wacha's on the injured list. Porcello, he's not that good. He had a terrible first start. He's showing his age. DeGrom's okay. I mean, he's good. He's very good. But Syndergaard's out, and Matt's got lit up like a Christmas tree tonight.
He did. No, Mats gave up, I believe, 8 runs in 4 innings. And yeah, I wanted to ask you about him. I mean, I know you mentioned, I believe in our first episode, that he was going to be a big key to the rotation. So why do you think he's been struggling so much?
It goes back to his pitch command to me, because there's times where he looks like he can get anybody out in the league. And then there's times where he's not confident up there, and he's not locating pitches where he should. He's leaving balls up high and they're getting clobbered. He doesn't have the big overpowering stuff that some think that he might have, because he just gets knocked around from time to time. So Steven Matz, yeah, I thought he was a huge piece of that rotation. I also mentioned that Chatwood and Mills were huge for the Cubs if they have any success, and they have, and look what they're doing. So Steven Matz, it's a rough journey for him. He's shown some flashes of being good, but now I think it's time for him to put up or shut up, because I don't think they're going to be wasting too much more time on him.
I agree. Now, the Mets don't have a choice where they can't waste too much more time on him. And as much as I thought he did have the talent, and I still think that, I don't think anything's changed there. My thought was actually Stroman was the most important piece for the Mets outside of DeGrom, because he was the only other proven starter that was left in that rotation, with Syndergaard being out for the season and Porcello and Waka being more end of the rotation type of guys. And Waka's been in and out of the bullpen going back to when he was with St. Louis anyway. So I really thought Stroman was the second most important pitcher on that staff, at least in the rotation. And he, I believe, made a total of 11 starts for the Mets since they traded for him from Toronto, and now he's going to be a free agent. So the Mets are being aggressive, and I respect that, but they're investing a lot into these guys like him and Edwin Diaz, who are just not performing to the standard that they need. And it puts even more pressure on guys like Matz to succeed. And when they don't, their struggles are really amplified.
Yeah, I wonder if Stroman will pack his bags up north and go back to Toronto. A young team looking good now. They finally are competing again. And you saw how fired up he was in the postseason, pitching on that torn ACL. And, I mean, it was healed, but still he came back early and looked very good in the postseason with Toronto. But we are going to transition over to hockey now. The Blackhawks move on. They beat Edmonton. That was a great series. It had me on the edge of my seat. The comeback victory in Game 3 was huge to give the Hawks a 2-1 series lead. It was just, there were 5 minutes, 3 minutes, I can't remember what it was, but they scored a lot of goals late in the game. They got a deflection. Matthew Highmore made a terrible turnover, and I was screaming. I was like, what's he doing on the ice? I mean, what's he doing on the ice?
That name.
Yeah, Matthew Highmore. I couldn't stand the guy. He was a fourth liner, and he's out there on the ice in the biggest stage, turning the puck over. He had it in his own zone and just he let it slip, and it went off his stick and in the net. But then he finally deflected one that went in and actually tied the game, and then they ended up going on to win. So he redeemed himself, and I'm starting to like Highmore a little bit now, but at the time I was cursing his name. So Matthew Highmore is an interesting player for the Hawks, but that's not what we're going to be spending too much time on, is Matthew Highmore on this podcast episode. But the Hawks move on. Great, fantastic goaltending from Corey Crawford in Game 4. He stood on his head. There was a 5-minute major on DeBrincat. Is there a suspension on him yet? Do you know? I don't think so.
I haven't heard of one yet. I'm not sure if there's a hearing for him with the player safety department or not, but as far as this recording, there hasn't been any news on that yet.
That'll be really cool if he can play tomorrow night, because that hit was, I don't know. But anyway, 5-minute major. Corey Crawford stood on his head the whole second period. Late in the game, they had the pulled goalie, and he stood on his head. Crawford, great goaltending. He shows why he's a cup winner and just a great all-around goaltender in the big stage. And honestly, I think this was the best hockey I've seen Jonathan Toews play in his career, this playoffs. He was setting guys up, giving Kubalik nice passes. He scored. He was all over the ice. And I think he came close to outperforming his opposing center on the other side, the opposing captain, Connor McDavid. They both played fantastic in the playoffs. Kirby Dach looked very good. What do you think of the Blackhawks?
Well, Toews was absolutely the biggest key to their victory for start to finish. Obviously, Crawford's last 2 games were fantastic, but his leadership was invaluable for that team in that series. But honestly, I think it comes down to the Blackhawks were really tenacious, really aggressive. They really forced the issue, and that's what you're supposed to do against a talented team that plays a somewhat laid-back style like the Oilers did. And the Blackhawks got a good contribution from their established stars like Toews, like Patrick Kane, like Corey Crawford in goal outside of Game 2. And while the Oilers did get obviously some contributions, especially from McDavid, the rest of the Blackhawks core, like Kubalik, really stepped up. DeBrincat really stepped up, and they really complemented each other as a team. We didn't see that with the Oilers outside of when they were on the power play. It was really top heavy. It was all or nothing, and that's just not a sustainable formula to win playoff games. The Oilers were definitely the more talented team going into that series. They have probably the best player in the league and a couple of other extremely high-profile guys. Draisaitl's probably the MVP this season, but their defense is very suspect. They turn the puck over a lot, and they made a lot of simple and avoidable mistakes, and that's going to cost you a playoff series almost every time.
Yeah, and for the Hawks, I don't know if you caught every game of this series, but I think the best defenseman for the Hawks was actually Slater Cuckoo.
He was outstanding.
He was making smart reads, great timely stick lifts, getting the puck out of the zone, moving it well. I really like Slater Cuckoo going forward in this series. And Kirby Dach was very good. He was moving up and down the ice, and he looks like he's going to be a star for a while. Talking about young talent, though, let's get over to the Rangers. News came out today about them. Are you stoked or what?
Oh man, I'm sure you know the answer to that question, man. The sting of the Rangers getting eliminated, being the only team swept, washed away really quickly when we got that first overall pick earlier today. What an unexpected but amazing boost that is for the team, who already has a lot of good young players already in place and a solid prospect pool. But I mean, going from losing the qualifying round to winning the draft lottery is like going from getting dumped by a 6 to banging a 10 within 6 hours. I mean, it's just such a great turnaround. Lafreniere is, Alexei Lafreniere is going to be the likely pick for the Rangers, for those who don't know. And his combination of size and speed and skill, and especially his vision and effort, of what really have stood out to me when I've seen the highlights tapes and watched a little bit of film. I still have some work to do there, but he's a very exciting piece that the Rangers will most likely have here when the draft happens. And I was very, very excited when I saw that Rangers ping pong ball come out at the lottery.
An anchor on the NHL Network said you put him on a line with Panarin next year and he's going to have 70 points. It's bold, but I think it might play off. Now, the Rangers have a ton of young talent. I mean, up and down the roster. It kind of reminds me of how Carolina was a few years back when they got Svechnikov, they had Aho, they had all these talented players.
They torched us throughout that series.
They did. And who are they taking on now?
The Bruins.
That's going to be rough. The Bruins haven't looked good at all so far.
Rematch of that Eastern Conference final from last year.
Exactly. And so anyway, you look up and down the roster of the Rangers, and you have talented young players: Buchnevich, Kakko, Panarin, Zibanejad. He's not. I don't know. Anyway, Lafreniere, you look at their defense with guys like Adam Fox, and you look at their goaltending. They got the stud, an old veteran, the wise head, Henrik Lundqvist, who might not be there much longer. And you have the two guys behind him, Georgiev and Shesterkin. Those two are 24 years old. You have two solid goaltenders to go out there and compete every single game that are very good. You have great lines up there. So I question this. I think the Rangers have a lot of talented wingers. Do you think that they make a push to go get a center iceman?
I would not put it out of the question, because outside of Mika Zibanejad, the Rangers' center depth is lacking a little bit in comparison to the wings. I do like Filip Chytil a lot. I think he could definitely be our second-line center going forward, but I personally think it would be a very smart idea to package Ryan Strome in a trade while his value is at its highest. The Rangers did that very well with Derek Brassard a few years ago and turned that into Mika Zibanejad and a second-round pick, which is by far the best trade the Rangers have made in the last few years. I do think it would be a good idea to improve that center depth. The Rangers have a lot of depth on the right side of the defense as well. Adam Fox is obviously untouchable at the moment, but I would not be surprised if the Rangers tried to package either Strome or DeAngelo with Georgiev rather than Lundqvist due to the salary cap staying flat, to try to get a center iceman to get a little bit of depth behind Zibanejad. But the one thing I do want to mention, I would be a little surprised if Lafreniere plays with Panarin, at least as a rookie, because they are both left wingers, and we still have Chris Kreider on the left side as well. So I think it's a little bit more likely that, at least to start, Lafreniere would play a middle six role rather than a top six role. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him play, as hopefully with Kakko on the other side for a while to come. Kakko's a natural complement to him as a right winger. You get a talented and young center like right now. Chytil's probably the best option for that as a line going forward, and there is just so much talent on that team and on that line. And almost the entire Rangers core is under the age of 27. You mentioned most of them. Panarin and Zibanejad are 27 and 28, I believe. We still got Jacob Trouba on the right side, who's 25. And while his first season was a mixed bag. And Igor Shesterkin, the real biggest piece of it, to me, the biggest piece of all of this is the clear heir to Henrik Lundqvist. He was outstanding when he debuted this year, only 24 2024. There's a lot of depth in the organization that's on the roster right now. Lafreniere is going to be on the Rangers to start next season. He's not going to need any seasoning. And there's still several other solid prospects, especially on defense, in our pool as well. So the future looks very, very bright for the team.
Yeah, I love that. And here's one thing I want to bring out there. I don't know the Rangers salary cap, where they are financially right now, but Toronto just got eliminated for like the 10th straight year. It seems like they've been in the playoffs for like 15 years. Do they want to clean house a little bit on their cap space and maybe trade someone like John Tavares to the Rangers?
You know, I did actually see a rumor suggesting just that. I can't remember where I saw that. I think it was a link on Twitter somewhere, so the source might not be entirely valid there. But I did see something suggesting that. Overall, I think that would have to wait at least one more year because the Rangers salary cap situation isn't great for one more season. We have Lundqvist who's still on the books, and we'll see what happens with him. We need to do right by him considering he's a franchise legend, but we're still his contract along with Mark Stalls, who thank God, and Brendan Smith, they all expire after next season. So those three combined will give us about $16 million in cap room, which is huge. It'll also give us the opportunity to extend some of our players who will be due for raises at that time, especially Zibanejad, whose contract I believe expires after 2022. And if he continues the pace he's on, he would absolutely be in line for a big raise. And we got to keep in mind guys like Kakko and Lafreniere will be due raises from their entry-level contracts here in a couple years as well. So I know the Rangers are a big market team who are looking to make a splash, but they've made splashes for their entire history, and a lot of them have been very short-sighted and very detrimental to long-term success. The Rangers have been very fortunate with their last two lotteries. It'll help speed up the rebuilding process, but for the most part, they've done a really good job staying pretty patient and taking the lucky breaks as they come. And I'm hopeful that they can wait one more season, especially with the salary cap in the NHL staying flat for next season and limiting that financial flexibility, waiting until a couple of those albatross contracts just come off the books instead of doing a buyout, because we're still paying Kevin Shattenkirk, we're still paying Dan Girardi, and it's keeping us from signing or trading for other guys like a Tavares or a similar splashy players. So I do think it's possible, but I think it'll be at least one more year down the road.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great points on the contracts over there. Speaking John Tavares, so let's cut over to the Islanders a little bit. The Islanders look pretty good against their series with Florida. Like you said, they play a completely different game than the Hawks and the Rangers. What did you like out of the Islanders this past week?
Honestly, they played to their strengths. I mentioned on the last episode that the Islanders are a defense-first team, and that's not a problem. And they didn't try to change their identity to match up with Florida's youthful offense, led by Barkov and Huberdeau. They just played their own style and trusted that it would help limit their productivity, and it did. And, Semyon Varlamov had a much better series than I think any of us were expecting. But, you got a defensive-minded coach in Barry Trotz, and they really did a nice job shutting down that top line of the Panthers. And if you do that, you're going to be successful because the Panthers don't have a lot of depth. I think the Capitals are going to be a much more challenging matchup for the Islanders in the next round, but they really did a good job playing to their strengths and letting their offensive guys like Barzal and Beauvillier excel when they did get the puck out of the defensive zone. But they did a really nice job limiting Florida and then capitalizing on the opportunities that gave them.
Yeah, Washington's going to be a huge test for them, a team that's been very familiar with the NHL playoffs over the years. And they got a huge goal scorer with Alex Ovechkin, and then they got the young, good talent on that roster. So it'll be a hard series for them, as it will be for the Hawks. But
well, that's actually the next thing I wanted to talk about is a little preview of the Blackhawks and Vegas' series in the first round. Vegas went 3-0 in the round robin. They got the first seed, and they got Max Pacioretty, their leading scorer, coming back for that Blackhawks series. And Vegas is a really good puck possession team. So how do you think the Blackhawks have to attack them to have any chance in that series?
I think they got to be jumpy. The way that they were against Edmonton, they got it and they moved it. They were very well at moving the puck, almost too well, where they passed it way too much, and then it led to some terrible turnovers. But like Vegas, it's going to be Robin Lehner most likely in net going against his old team, so that'll be a little reunion going on. So I'd like to see the Hawks get on them early. I'm really scared of one guy on that team, and it might not be a big factor what you might think, but I think it's Ryan Reeves. That guy plays a physical game, and one bad hit, and you could end the season of the Hawks. And that guy, he's going to be under their skin the entire series. So if they play a physical game, guys like Kajula get in there, get chippy, sort of like get under their skin a little bit, maybe get the puck out, start moving it. But Crawford needs to be huge in that series, like you said, to get Pacioretty back. And I don't know if I like their chances, but you know what? I'm going to ride with the Hawks because they're my team, and I'm going to be watching them every single night they're playing. But I think if they get the puck in the zone, start moving things around, setting things up, then I think that they could be okay.
They have to move the puck quickly. I think that was one of the Rangers' biggest downfalls in the Carolina series, is that they were passive and let Carolina, who was very aggressive, come and dictate the style and pace of the play. And if Chicago does that at all against Vegas, they are not going to win that series. That's what Vegas absolutely thrives on. They have a lot of depth, especially on the defensive end. They got guys like Nate Schmidt and Alec Martinez playing second and third line minutes. So while there's not a ton of top end talent on that team, they have a lot of above average players that are really aggressive, and they'll challenge the inexperience of most of the Blackhawks. So to me, I think guys like Taze and Kane and Duncan Keith, who have been there and experienced it, really need to make sure that the younger players are prepared, or they're going to get washed in that series.
Yeah, it'll be very competitive. So we're going to be transitioning over to basketball a little bit, and then we have a question from one of the listeners, so we'll get to that as well. But basketball, we have the Brooklyn Nets. They'll be in the playoffs taking on the Toronto Raptors, so a huge test early on in their little playoff run that they have. They went 3-1 this past week. They beat the Bucks, the Kings, and the Clippers. They dropped the game to the Celtics. What do you think? Do you like the Bucks or the Nets' chances or no?
Well, while the Nets do have a tough opening round draw against the Raptors, I do think, amazingly, that they at least have a chance to pull off that upset. Well, they have a lot of talent not playing either due to injuries or opting out, with Durant and Irving and DeAndre Jordan all being out. They are such a well-coached team, and the culture of that team the Nets has really changed over the last 3 or 4 years. And Kenny Atkinson, the old coach, was a big part of that. And then he got fired in the middle of this season, which came as a big surprise to many. I know I was caught off guard by it. And then Jacques Vaughn has come in and stepped up and done an incredible job leading a team that's had to sign several players off the street. And while they're, some of them are established guys like Jamal Crawford, or they tried Michael Beasley before he immediately tested positive for COVID. But Vaughn has come into a very fluid situation, even more so than other teams, with the players on the roster changing on an almost daily basis, and after a long pause. And he has come in, really stabilized them. He's a player's coach, and the team has just spoke glowingly about him, getting an endorsement from Crawford, who just signed with the team, and beating some of the best teams in the bubble, like the Bucks and the Clippers, like you mentioned. So while the Raptors are going to be a tough matchup for them, I do think they are capable of pulling off the upset, because they have the right attitude and the right culture on that team right now.
Yeah, I love watching basketball that's team-oriented. Like, for instance, the Pacers a few years back, they loved to move the ball around. There wasn't one guy taking over. And you look at this Nets team, if they want to win, that's the only way they can do it. I mean, Karis LeVert's good, but he's not going to take over a basketball game. They need to pass the ball, move it around, and get open looks, because that's what's going to lead to their success. You mentioned Vaughn. I think he's a great coach for them coming into this bubble, like you mentioned. And the way that he took over that offense, the way when he took over the coaching job, he really transformed that offense, and it started to lead to some scoring, them scoring a lot of points down the stretch. And it's going to be hard without Irving and Durant, obviously. But then again, you got these guys coming in, and they're all feisty. They all want to win. So if they can move the ball and get open looks, I like their chances a little bit more than if they don't.
Well, absolutely. They do have to play like a team, even more than the teams that have established stars. But there is no way that any team is going to go all the way through the championship just on the back of one player, as good as that player is. But I do think Karis LeVert is capable of taking over a game. I'm not saying it's a great formula to rely on every game, but I looking back, I know he had that, I want to say 51-point game, and they had that double overtime win against the Celtics earlier this season. If they need a bucket, he is their their guy. But the Nets right now, they have to rely on the trio of LeVert, Jared Allen, and Joe Harris to get the majority of their buckets and stops. And Jared Allen especially, I think, is going to be the biggest key defensively because he is the big anchor there down low. And I think he responded extremely well to being put behind DeAndre Jordan to start the season, just because Jordan didn't want to be the backup. Allen's 22, and he's the anchor down low with Jordan not playing in the bubble right now. So if he gets into any sort of foul trouble, the Nets are going to be in trouble, especially against a team like the Raptors who thrive up front with Pascal Siakam. So I do think that the coaching has been outstanding, especially given all the circumstances. But I disagree. I do think they have a player who is capable of taking over a game if needed. I'm not saying they should rely on that every game because that will be a downfall. But if they need somebody to come up with a big bucket, he is standing on that roster right now.
All right. We'll have to agree to disagree on that one. But I did want to touch on Jim Boylen, the Bulls, Arturas Karnisovas. So let me give you a backstory on this. So there was an article posted on NBCSportsChicago.com a few weeks ago, and they talked about the connection between Jim Boylen, the front office, and the players. And it's a great read. I'll actually share it on our Twitter page on Big City Sports, so look out for that. Anyway, Arturas Karnisovas, who's the new guy in charge over in Chicago, taking over the Bulls. So all the players, I won't say all, a lot of the players are not a big fan of Jim Boylen, the head coach of the team right now. Yeah. Guys like Zach LaVine are saying that they're not playing for him, and they basically like look lethargic out there because if you're not going out there to fight for your coach, similar to how the Falcons did it, this is football, but the Falcons did with Dan Quinn saving his job. Absolutely. If you're not going to have players that want to play for you, it's going to be hard to keep the room. So.
And you heard what Daniel Gafford said on that podcast about Boylen as well. They're not even being private about their criticism. They're going public with it.
Yeah. And it seems like Karnisovas wants to keep him, but he doesn't want to. I don't know how to word it. It's like a disconnect between everybody. Like the front office is telling him no, the players are telling him no, and the more the time goes by, you're starting to question, what's he really thinking? Is he actually going to be the head coach next year?
Well, I personally think it would be a huge mistake to keep him around. He does not command the room. He does not have the respect of his players. And when that happens, you're not going to win a lot of basketball games. But, and of course, we can talk about the Bulls' disjointed and somewhat odd roster as well, being a component of that. But Boylen's strict, no-nonsense type of style, while I do respect what he's trying to do, is just not a good fit. It does not mesh well with that team. And when you have the team openly criticizing you, it's just not a great situation. Yeah, I read a couple articles about that situation as well. There have been rumors about Boylen going back to basically when he was hired. And I read one, I believe it was on Blogabull on SB Nation, that talked about how the players are concerned that the front office isn't listening to their concerns about Boylen, and that Reinsdorf, the owner, might want him around, but Karnisovas might want to bring in his own guy. And how much of an impact do you think that would have if the front office would not be listening to the players' concerns? What type of impact do you think that would have on team chemistry especially?
I think it has a huge impact, not just in basketball. You look at the Jets in football. Not necessarily – I mean, I guess they ended up getting rid of Jamal Adams. But you look at, like, the Jaguars, they handled that Jalen Ramsey situation pretty bad. I mean, it ended up turning out good. But now you look at Yannick Ngakoue for them. He's been crying to get out, and they're just not doing it. So that's a bad look for all sports if the front office and players aren't connected, because then it's that fine line. Like the players want it to be a league and the owners want it to be business. So that fine line of business and the league and the players don't always meet in the middle. And if it's not meeting with that team, then I don't think there's any success whatsoever. Maybe Karnisovas has something up his sleeve by just dumping the whole roster and bringing a completely new team in there and keeping Boylen as the head coach, which wouldn't be the best strategy, but you never know.
I would not think that would be the best for the short or long-term future of the Bulls, is the polite way to put that. But no, my gut feeling is that Karnisovas would want to bring in his own guy. We know that he is a very well-respected executive going back. He's been in the league for a couple decades, most recently as an assistant with the Nuggets, I believe, and he played a part in their drafting of guys like Michael Porter and Jamal Murray, and they have obviously turned into important contributors. We've seen what Porter can do here in the bubble, just getting started. But my gut is that Karnisovas does want to bring in his own guy, regardless of what Reinsdorf might be thinking. And I think if the Bulls are going to get off to a good start under the Boylen era, they have to at least make an attempt to appeal to their players here. And while they didn't do that with Gar Forman, who shall not be named in Bulls country, but they need to get off to a fresh start and a clean slate if they're going to have any chance here. Otherwise, it's just going to be sitting behind the 8 ball from day one. And the Bulls roster doesn't have any untouchables on it, in my opinion. They should be listening to any offers for trades. I know that with LaVine, the Knicks and Nets, both the other teams we cover here, have both done homework on potential trades for him. And I think the Bulls should be very open to listening and starting fresh. Karnisovas is going to want to bring in his own guys, and judging his track record, we can at least think that he has a better reputation as a talent evaluator. So I don't think it would be a bad idea to kind of start fresh, build around maybe Lauri Markkanen if he can stay on the court, rather than a one-dimensional guy like LaVine.
Yeah, I agree 100% on you with that with LaVine and being no untouchables on the team. LaVine plays an ISO style of ball, and he gets it. He goes to the hoop. He might score 40 points a night, but you saw what Kemba Walker did with the Nuggets. The Hornets. They didn't win any games. I mean, he was dropping 50, 40 points like every other night, and I mean, they're always taking the L. So it's not good to have a player like that on a bad team that can't score outside of him, because you're not going to be winning any games. So it's nice to have him around, because he's that one bright spot on a team you root for, and you're like, all right, at least we get to see him tonight. But then again, you want to see the team coming together and win a basketball game.
Well, going back to Boylen a little, LaVine was definitely the Bulls' best player this season. I don't think anyone's going to dispute that. But there were several times we saw Boylen's negative impact on team morale and chemistry, taking guys out who were having good games or needed in a close situation. I think the one that went viral not long before the pause was the Bulls were down by a couple of points, and he tried to take LaVine out for an offense-defense substitution. And LaVine, very clearly said, "I got 41 points. Why the hell are you taking me out?" And it is, I get that he's limited defensively, but you make these players upset, the leaders and best players on the team, and it's just going to have a effect on the rest of the team's morale, and it's going to make them openly question their coach, and we've seen that on several occasions now. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. But if the coach, it's not just that the coach isn't popular, but he clearly just does not command the respect of that room, and that's just not a sustainable formula to win basketball games.
Yeah, hopefully they can transform that roster to at least bring somewhat success over to Chicago, because they've been a rough watch for a few years now. I think they do need to end up getting rid of someone like Lauri Markkanen. I don't think he really fits. He's a big shooter that, honestly, when he's not healthy, can't shoot. And I think he'd be a good fit to go somewhere else, but I think you could still get some value for him if he can stay healthy. But I think you got to move on from players like that. I think they need to keep players like Wendell Carter. He's a good fit there. But other than that, I think everything's up in the air.
That's very fair. Yeah, Carter, I think the jury is still out on. And one other article I wanted to touch on that I at least glanced over a little bit before we recorded is it was actually in Forbes that it was suggested that the Bulls might not want to make a coaching change because of the financial ramifications of this pandemic. I thought it was a very odd headline. Yeah, I see your reaction there, and I get it. Yeah. But it was a legitimate Forbes article from about 4 or 5 days ago that suggested the Bulls ownership might not want to make a coaching change due to the uncertainty of the financial situation that this COVID pandemic has caused. I personally, at least on first thought, was thinking, the Bulls are worth hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and they can afford to make a coaching change if they wanted to, regardless of this situation. But if it actually plays out where the Bulls don't make a coaching change specifically due to financial reasons, and Boylen's just kind of there as a sitting duck, how do you think that would play out next season?
That would be the worst management in sports history. Honestly, that would be terrible. You're going in there with literally, he knows he shouldn't be there, but the only reason he's there is because of the contract. And I don't think, look, Reinsdorf owns the White Sox. He owns the Bulls. He's got to have enough money to just say, you know what, let's get this clown out of town, unless he's the reason that he's still there. The Bulls are in a weird situation. Let's just hope that they can figure it out soon. We did want to get to a question from our listener. One of our listeners asked us a question on the Chicago Cubs bullpen. This is coming in from Noah. What would you do about the Cubs bullpen if you were the manager and was pitching an idea to the owner? Swig, I'll let you take the first crack at this one. What do you think? What would you do about the Cubs bullpen if you were the manager and was pitching an idea to the owner?
That is a very interesting sales pitch, but it's a very creative question. If you're in David Ross's shoes as a first-year manager for a team off to a good start and a team that clearly has a weak spot, I think that David Ross would have to be aggressive in terms of appealing to the front office, the GM, the ownership, whoever's going to give off the okay on a trade. But if the Cubs are serious about contending this season while they still have their young core intact, and I know that we've talked about how a lot of these guys aren't under contract for more than another year or two, I think Ross needs to use that in his pitch, that our long-term future is far from solidified. And it would be best for us at the moment to focus on the short term with all this uncertainty, both with the team's core and the financial uncertainty caused by this pandemic. So I think he needs to go in to the ownership or to the GM and say, hey, we have a small window to win here. We need to shore up our biggest weakness, which is clearly our bullpen, and we have the depth in the organization to make a move for a rental, and that if we don't do it, it's going to cripple us in the postseason if we get that far, because the Cubs bullpen as is not going to get them to a World Series. And he can say that very bluntly, and I think it will at least help them make some sort of move to shore up that bullpen. What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of want to take this from Theo's side, the president of baseball operations, who would be ending up making the move if the pitch is good enough. Theo has already came out and said that he doesn't want to move. I mean, you looked at his moves in the offseason. He didn't bring in any veteran reliever, like any. All he did was sign these minor league contracts, hoping that they'd all compete in spring training, and you find out a bullpen and sort of build as you fly. The Cubs bullpen has always been a little knack, especially these past couple of years. There's guys that come in, there's guys that don't. But this year, it's these names that we haven't heard of that are really soiling their pants whenever they get on the big stage. So it's tough. I think that what they need to do is they need to start going to guys that they can trust in these situations and see if they can continue on. I'd be skeptical to make a move, though, in this day and age right now, because you've already seen what's happened with the Marlins, the Cardinals, and honestly, the Indians have had a couple occasions. There were a few times there were a few players that went out, and we haven't seen any positive tests from them yet, but it's still up in the air. I wouldn't make the move, because if you do, you're giving up depth in the organization to go get an arm who might not be able to pitch for you if the season ends up getting postponed or canceled or put on hiatus. And if it's a 1-year rental, you're not getting anything. That's one thing I was looking forward to in hockey, was when the Hawks traded Robin Lehner. If that season's canceled, he's a free agent. We got Malcolm Subban and prospects, so that wouldn't have been bad. But what do you think?
That, but no, and that's definitely a way to look at it. There's a lot of unpredictability that the season might not start. But I would definitely counter with that short window, and that the Cubs only have this year and maybe one more year to maximize that before they lose some big pieces. The other point that I would make if I'm in David Ross's shoes is that even if the season does get finished and whichever reliever you get is only going to make, say, 15 or 20 appearances the rest of the season, I would also argue that because of that, the cost would be a lot lower to get him, which makes it a much more lower risk move. And is similar logic if you were to get a starting pitcher to replace a guy like Chatwood or Mills. They would only start 7 or 8 games at this point, so it wouldn't take a lot in return to get them. And these teams that might end up being sellers in the shortened season will take something rather than nothing. So you can get these at least somewhat valuable players for pennies on the dollar. I think the Cubs, due to their great start and their mediocre division around them and the complete uncertainty of the Cardinals, should be aggressive, and Ross should definitely pitch that to the ownership.
I agree with you there. I think that he should make a pitch to try to bring in some help, because that bullpen is looking very bad so far. But that's going to do it for us today. I appreciate you guys tuning in to another. This is episode 3 of the Young, Fresh, Big City Sports Podcast. For Dylan Kearns
and Swig,
we were saying good night, everybody, and I hope you guys enjoy this. Please click a subscribe and submit your questions again. We'll get to them at the end of each episode if there are any. Please subscribe. Check us out on Twitter and all our other platforms. Good night.